This story will tell about a girl who had no home at all. Her name was Lucy, and she was unemployed. So one cold and windy day, she knocked on a stranger's door. When she looked at the state of the estate, she was sure that they needed a maid, and for this reason, she decided to try her luck. Due to circumstances, Lucy did not have a letter of recommendation. However, as a maid who started cleaning stairs and gradually gained experience, she is confident that she could work harder in this place than anyone else. However, sometime after she knocked, the girl realized that the owner was not going to come out. She sat on the ground and felt the cold penetrate her entire body. Lucy assumed that he probably went out for a walk or fell asleep so soundly that he didn't even hear her calling, while she blew on her hands in order to warm them up at least a little. It was the top of a mountain, so there was absolutely nowhere to stop. There was also no crew in the village. For this reason, Lucy decided to just try to hold out for a little while, because as soon as she saw the ad that a maid was needed and saw that salary, of course she couldn't pass by. The girl was not going to miss this chance under any circumstances, since the annual salary of an ordinary maid was 3 times less than the amount, considering that this salary was paid annually. At first, Lucy even thought that it was some kind of human trafficking, but soon she heard from people that more than 100 maids had already been kicked out of this house. Also, the residents said that the owner of the house was truly crazy in order to dispel the doll he tore and destroyed the entire house, and the maids, of course, had to clean it all up. No matter how hard he tried, if something didn't go his way, the maids were immediately fired. And it was for this reason that the ads appeared every time, because they simply couldn't find a suitable lady for this position. Lucy then understood perfectly well that such a huge sum of money was only because no one stayed in that place. And besides, the employer was a real dragon, and this, of course, initially repelled her. However, she soon realized that it made no difference what race the employer was, as long as he paid her well. However, as soon as she arrived at the house, she was surprised because she imagined its size to be much larger. Lucy thought that dragons were imaginary creatures from fairy tales, so she came mostly out of curiosity to check if this was really true. She didn't know all the details, but she heard people say that the war stopped because a dragon had settled on the border. Then she assumed that, in theory, this man should have been good, because he had just finished the war. And Lucy believed that she could easily provide him with services and receive very good money for it. With that kind of money, she could become the owner of her own house in just a year, which is why the girl really wanted to get this position for herself with all her heart. She didn't know whether it was important that the owner of the house had a nasty and picky character. There were many people in the world who demanded a lot and paid an incredibly smaller amount than this young man. For this reason, Lucy was not afraid at all. Everyone stopped her and said that she could die if she angered this sensitive dragon. The girls didn't care at all. She believed that if such a price included accepting his character, then she believed that he was a very conscientious owner who complied with the conditions laid. In addition, Lucy had not received any letters of recommendation for many years, and her salary was the lowest. Her savings amounted to only 1,000,000 golds. The girl knew that this was a great opportunity for her, and it came at a time when she was already thinking that buying her own house was a dream that would only come true in the next life. Well, now she believed in the best, and Lucy was not going to leave at all, even if she could die before the interview itself. From that moment on, several hours passed. It was already completely dark outside, and it became much colder. The poor girl was still lying under the door and writing something on the cold tiles. She even lost consciousness for a while because of the cold she was experiencing. It was very dark around, and because of this, it was uncomfortable. Lucy hoped that dawn would come as soon as possible, because for the first time in her life, she was waiting for sunlight. And then she suddenly saw that something was glowing. At first, the girl thought that it was the sun that was just beginning to rise. However, looking up, she saw that this color was coming from the rooms in the palace. Lucy was shocked because she had thought the whole time that the owner was not at home. However, this turned out to be not the case. The girl thought that this was all some kind of madness. She started running towards that window, and then she saw something unusual on her hand. As soon as Lucy ran out of the castle, she saw a clear full moon rising in the night sky. It was also pink in color. And at that time, she suddenly remembered the words of her uncle from the center, who was involved in employment, and really tried to stop her and dissuade her from this work for her own happiness. He told the girl that if she just went there, she would already have big problems that she definitely wouldn't be able to cope with, not to mention if she was hired. It was especially dangerous to be there at night when the full moon was rising. Lucy, remembering these words, did not have time to do anything because from the window from which the light was coming, she heard a huge explosion, which she raised her head and saw. The girl was amazed. She looked up and saw that all these fragments of the mansion were falling like snow. Lucy was very surprised by the fact that she was thinking about this at such a dangerous moment, and did not understand how it happened that the second floor exploded. She also thought about the fact that if the owner had allowed the car to be repaired, she would have had to fix it. It was her job, and the girl still couldn't even move from the spot. She simply didn't know what to do. At that moment, one of the fragments flew onto Lucy's head and hit her incredibly hard that she began to fall down and gradually lose consciousness. Lucy didn't understand what kind of punishment this was, that she was worried about her work much more than about her life. But as soon as a piece of shrapnel fell on her head, it became clear to her why accident sites were always surrounded by tape, and that's exactly what happened if you got close to them. Even though the girl was gradually losing consciousness, at that moment, she still thought about the owner and really hoped that he was safe, and looking a little more closely at the place where the explosion occurred, she saw the silhouette of a man. She immediately became interested in who it was. However, she finally lost consciousness. The man had already come down from the mansion, and seeing her lying on the ground, became interested. This man came closer to Lucy. He touched her face and could not take his eyes off her. His eyes were bright red, and all over his body small black silhouettes were visible, similar to hieroglyphs. In fact, Lucy worked when she was still very young. Her mother sent her to this job, but she thought it was the right thing to do because at least there was food and a roof over her head. The girl then told her mother that she didn't have to worry because she would definitely do everything as she was taught, earn a lot of money, buy a house, and they would be able to eat delicious food and live together again. Therefore, she was even glad that she was leaving then. However, in the end, the years passed, and Lucy still did not manage to realize her dream at the moment. Because of this, the girl was very sad. After some time, Lucy began to regain consciousness, tears streaming down her cheeks, because dreams always pulled out old memories at the most inopportune moment. But the girl tried to calm down, because she knew that she shouldn't relax. She felt that she was lying on the ground and didn't understand why she fell asleep in that particular place. She didn't remember anything at all. Lucy's head ached incredibly strangely, but as soon as she turned her head to the side, she saw a man lying next to her who was also unconscious. At first, the girl was incredibly surprised when she saw him. However, after that, she jumped away from him and screamed loudly because she definitely didn't expect to see anyone next to her. From this scream, the man gradually began to wake up. However, he was unable to do so. Meanwhile, Lucy began to examine him and try to understand who he was. The stranger's clothes were torn, so she could see some strange drawings on his chest, as well as on his face. He was covered in tattoos, but the girl didn't understand why he gave off an ominous vibe. She even thought that the longer she looked at his drawings, she would become completely cursed. Lucy looked more closely and saw a small black tail behind him, and immediately wondered what kind of person he was. However, as soon as she realized that it was a tail, she immediately realized that it was not a person at all. It was really that same dragon. Because of this, she stood up on her feet and was simply confused for some time. At that very moment, this stranger had a really bad dream. He was in some dark room and heard a familiar voice. This voice said that on this day it was possible to add more. After this, he approached the person who was chained to one place and asked if she knew what was supposed to happen next. After this girl did something, this strange man with terrible energy smiled and said that she was a good girl and understood everything correctly, because dragons were born for this very reason. After that, he looked at the girl who was chained to the bed and saw that it was Lucy. However, he did not know her, so he could not understand anything. After this unusual event happened to him, he immediately opened his eyes. The man realized that it was just a dream. However, his whole business was sweating because he was very scared. He sat up in bed and suddenly saw that he had a blanket on, which of course surprised him very much because he never covered himself. To do this, he looked around and saw a fire in the fireplace. He immediately realized that it was probably that girl who did all this, and this made him a little wary because he did not ask her for anything. It was difficult to move, so when he left the room, he held onto the wall. Despite the fact that she looked completely different, he almost killed her. Because of this, he was very ashamed because he did not want to harm her. After that, he activated his fire circle ability and reviewed all the events that happened. He was glad that at least he didn't shoot her in the head before she had time to see something. At that moment, he opened the door to another room and thought that the next ad should definitely include a hair color restriction because he didn't want something like that to happen in his area anymore. There were no more women with that hair color. However, he still didn't want to have the possibility. I entered the room and immediately saw a girl who had half her face bandaged. When she saw her owner, she immediately smiled and said that she was very glad that he had finally woken up. The girl pointed to a huge pot of food and said that she looked in the pantry and there were only vegetables there, so she made a small vegetable stew. She also added that when they bring meat to the estate, she will definitely make night meat, which will definitely be much tastier. The man at that moment was not going to listen to her at all. He even got a little angry because she did not let him get a word in edgewise. So he looked at her with a stern gaze and asked why she did not leave as soon as she regained consciousness. The girl was a little surprised when she heard this. However, she continued to guard the peace and said that she came to work for him for this reason and stayed. At that moment, the man began to examine her with his eyes. He noticed that the bandage on her head was too tight, but the one on her head was really real. He couldn't believe that even after she got hit by his magic shot, she still wanted to continue working in that place. He thought that if she wasn't crazy, then she had some other purpose for all of this. And he was already starting to get tired of it. He sighed heavily and said that he did not hire people with hair color like hers. He was ready to pay for the treatment. However, pointing to the door, he asked her to leave because he did not hire her for the job. Lucy was very surprised when she heard about the hair color. She said that there was nothing like that in the ad, and she did not know about such conditions. But the man explained that he had just added it. Then the girl began to insist on her own and began to ask him about different things. She asked, why was this hair color unpleasant to him? Did his ex-wife or lover really have a similar one? The man heard this and became very angry. He immediately remembered the dream he had while he was unconscious and thought that it was certainly a terrible thought. However, if this was true, then he simply had no choice. So, sighing heavily, he said that everything really was like that. He looked like that. Lucy just looked at the man with her big green eyes for a while and said that she understood everything. The owner himself looked away from her and really hoped that she would finally disappear from his sight. In fact, he couldn't control his emotions because of the past, but he certainly had no reason to hire such a girl. It would not be difficult to find workers for the house. For this reason, he was not too desperate that the girl had to be thrown out. However, at that moment, Lucy went to the kitchen table and took a knife from there. The girl brought this knife to her hair and said that in that case, she would shave her head if he was not satisfied with the color of her hair. She was ready to actually do this. She said that she could be bald and asked if this solution would suit him so that he would still hire her. The guy was very surprised as soon as he heard this, but he still stopped her, and the girl was left with her hair. The man was very hungry, so he sat down at the dinner table and started talking to Lucy in order to get to know her a little better. The girl was very surprised when she heard that he was a half-breed, but the guy explained that from his ridiculously sticking-out tail, it should have been immediately clear that he was born that way, and unfortunately, he couldn't turn into a reptile like the others. He also asked with irritation in his voice how it was possible not to know this, because she herself made the decision to come and serve the dragon, so he thought that she found out all the possible information. But Lucy bowed and only said that for her, race had absolutely no meaning if this place paid well. For this reason, she did not find out much about it. And she explained to us that her homeland is a village on the southernmost edge of the country. News about the border practically never reached them. But even despite this, she was familiar with the dragons themselves. In their homeland, they sold souvenirs in similar forms, necklaces and figurines. The man looked at her in surprise. However, by that time, the stew was already ready and he began to eat. He said that he was a half-breed, so he looked different and asked for forgiveness for not being able to live up to her expectations. Lucy immediately understood that this made him feel a little offended and replied that she didn't mean that at all. He talked her out of shaving her head by snatching the knife from his hands, and for that she was grateful to him. The man also forgave her for pretending to be seriously injured, so he was really a very good person, and when he found out that she didn't need the bandages all over her face, he simply told her to take them off and didn't even scold her for it. Lucy knew that he was a good person after all. However, he had a slightly nervous and irritable character, so she assumed that she just needed to be more careful with him. At that moment, the man actually tried this stew and was very pleasantly surprised. He did not expect that it could turn out so tasty. The guy couldn't even hold back. He started eating quickly, spoon after spoon, and after that, he even overpowered the plate and simply drank all the remaining liquid. Lucy, seeing this, was very glad that he had a good appetite. However, soon he ate absolutely the entire plate and even the pot of stew that she had prepared. After such a hearty breakfast, the man even found it difficult to get up from the table, and Lucy asked him if he liked the dish. The man looked at her with a furious gaze and asked her not to misunderstand him. He had fired the maid a long time ago and had only eaten raw vegetables all this time. It was important to him that Lucy understood that he ate all of this only because it was normal food and not because she cooked well. The girl did not object. She smiled and said that she understood everything, and she thought about the fact that the boy next door, with whom she lived, spoke with exactly the same token when they played at the Mother's Point. She already missed those times, because it was a carefree time in her life. At that moment, the man asked if everything was all right with her head. He ran his hand over the table and said that it was not only about cooking. She should also be able to clean, of course, because that was the job of a maid. However, when he looked at his perfectly clean finger, on which there was not a single speck of dust, he was very surprised. He thought that she would not have had time to clean up. However, this turned out to be not the case. The girl immediately smiled happily and said that it was clean there, because she had gotten dressed while waiting for the gentleman to finally wake up, since she had nothing to do anyway. Lucy also said that she checked all the food supplies, studied the layout of the mansion, and put in order the tools that she was going to use. She gathered the broken things in one place, washed the dusty blanket, and hung it out to dry, and sewed up the worn-out rags so that the name could still be used for some time. Lucy also said that his bedroom was locked, so she couldn't get in, and if there was anything there to wash, then he should have given her the old blankets too. But then she remembered the explosion that had happened and assumed that there was now a big mess there. Her eyes lit up with joy, and she said that in that case, she could clean there too if he hired her. The man was sincerely amazed. He did not understand what kind of girl she was. He was going to find fault with something and just throw her out. However, he could not even imagine what he could find fault with. When he looked into her eyes, he saw that there was some kind of madness there. He could not believe that she really loved money so much that she was ready to agree to this job. He decided that, over time, it would be necessary to find some pretext. He needed to find some flaw in her so that he could kick her out and not worry. Then he saw that she had a small ring on her ring finger and asked if she was married. Lucy then smiled happily and said that this was exactly how she wanted to work hard in order to eventually buy a house where she and her husband could live happily and start their own family. Therefore, she really hoped that he would still hire her for the job. She promised that she would try incredibly hard to live up to his expectations. In the end, the guy simply had no choice, so he allowed Lucy to stay. He led the girl into the room in which she was now supposed to live. The girl noticed that there was an incredible amount of dust in this room, and it was also very dark. She decided that everything needed to be cleaned thoroughly so that she could at least sleep there. Then the girl looked at her ring and wondered why it worked. After all, she wore her mother's thing to scare off guys, and could not imagine that thanks to it, she could get a job. Lucy took off her ring so that it wouldn't bother her, and mentally thanked her mother, who gave it to her, and thereby helped her without even knowing it. After this, the girl lay down on the bed and thought that it was thanks to her mother that she found herself a wonderful job. Meanwhile, the man returned to his bedroom. He lay on the bed and thought about what could happen. In addition, he took a receipt from her so that everything should be under control. Of course, she had a husband, so in his opinion, Lucy would definitely not have openly pestered him. And if she had done something strange, he could have simply kicked her out, and that would have been it. When he thought about how Liosik would pester him, and he found it very funny, because in his opinion, this woman was really very strange, but for some reason she interested him. However, the color of her hair still bothered him incredibly much. However, he believed that there was no need to look at her face. So, somehow, he would cope with all this. After that, the man turned to the other side of the bed and began to fall asleep, with the hope that at least that day he would not dream of that terrible person. He was even ready for him to dream of that girl, but not that man. However, unfortunately, this did not happen. As soon as he fell asleep, he dreamed that the door opened and a fair-haired man entered the room. He turned to Scar and asked if he missed him. After this, he suggested that the man take up the matter with renewed strength on this day and finally finish what they had started. From that moment on, several hours passed and Lucy finally woke up. She was glad that she started working as a maid in this place, and the first morning after she found a job was really special. She succeeded only on the condition that she would definitely not be constantly in front of the owner's eyes. She even signed a rather strange agreement that contained conditions. These conditions stated that Lucy should never climb onto the owner's bed, not spy on him, especially when he was sleeping or washing, and she could not divulge any information. The first thing Lucy did after she woke up was go to the kitchen to make breakfast. She thought that the man was just strict, so she didn't understand where these strange rumors came from, that he was really crazy. But she could prove that they appeared because people themselves irritated him greatly before she went to this estate. Her uncle, the hired one, told her that if she seduced this dragon, she would receive a large sum, so she should have kept this in mind. Of course, as soon as Lucy found out about her salary, she understood that this man was very rich, and because of this and the words of that man from the bureau, girls came in droves to this place in order to get what they wanted. I could even clearly imagine how angry he was when they thought only about their salary and did not do the housework as needed. Now Lucy understood what this strange agreement was for and why the man had such a hot temper. She would also get tired of all this sooner or later, and she would simply run out of patience. She also thought that she was definitely not abnormal enough to climb into someone else's bed, so she believed that her wonderful money, which was her salary, could now definitely be in her pocket. Moreover, starting office romances was very stupid and disgusting for her. It brought back terrible memories from her past, so the girl found it unpleasant to even think about it. And from that moment on, several weeks passed. Lucy worked quietly and performed all the necessary duties, and also avoided being seen by the owner as much as possible. However, one cold autumn day, the man himself came into her room early in the morning, and in a quiet voice through the crack in the door, said that he would give her money and she could go for a walk. Of course, Lucy was very shocked then. She did not understand why he sent her into the dark, and even asked what she had done to him that was so bad that he decided to come up with such a punishment for her. But the man explained that he meant to go to the village tomorrow. She had to pretend that she was going on vacation, and for some time, simply not return to the estate. Lucy didn't understand why she needed to do this, and as soon as she asked, the man answered that it was none of her business. His voice sounded very stern. The man also said that, as soon as she returned, even if they were shouting outside, she should under no circumstances enter if she did not want to get hurt like last time. The girl was very surprised. She was even a little upset. However, she agreed to this because she simply had no other choice. When the owner left, he left her some money, with which she could have lived comfortably in good conditions, not just for a few days, but for a whole month. So Lucy was very happy with this opportunity. But the girl was still worried about one question. Where did he get such a large sum of money, since he was not from a rich family? Also, during the time that she worked for him, Lucy noticed that sometimes he came home in disheveled clothes and assumed that this could have had something to do with it. Or maybe he just didn't understand the prices and therefore threw money around. As soon as Lucy saw such a large sum of money, an ominous voice sounded in her head that the trip there and back would have cost quite a bit of money. The owner's room was on the second floor in the east wing. The girl lived on the first floor of the west wing. She didn't like the color of Lucy's hair, so every day of the week that she worked for him, he avoided her. The girl believed that if she saved this money, she would have enough for a house and for life, and would simply stay in the estate, pretending that she was not there. And Lucy really stayed there. She didn't go anywhere, despite the fact that the man strictly warned her. Also, from that moment, she decided not to eat, because appropriating daily allowances and also spending food was already too much for her. Therefore, the girl believed that when she could no longer bear it, she could drink rotten water and everything would be fine. Several days passed and Lucy did nothing, and she did not notice anything unusual happening. And in the estate, the girl thought about whether her 2 days of absence were enough. No matter how much she thought, the girl understood that this vacation was very sudden and assumed that the owner needed it. She also noticed that he had been eating very little lately. She didn't understand why, because she cooked everything at the highest level as always. Previously, he could eat a whole pot, but now he couldn't even lift 2 spoons. She assumed that most likely something had happened to his health and was worried about it. However, when evening came, Lucy saw that a full moon had appeared in the window. She immediately remembered the words that the man had told her about how she shouldn't have approached the house, especially during the full moon, and she wondered if the full moon could have made him feel bad. She even thought that he was a werewolf. Of course, she understood that when things were bad, she needed the care of another person. However, she could no longer obey the master's orders. No matter what, she had no right to go upstairs and watch, no matter how interesting it was. Lucy tried to convince herself that she shouldn't have done this. And then suddenly, the girl heard loud screams coming from above. A man was shouting at someone and asking him to go away. The girl was ready to burst into tears. It was unbearable for her to hear all this. But soon there was another big explosion, and the ceiling collapsed. She was lying under the bed, so she was almost not injured. However, several stones still fell on her head, and because of this, she had blood on her head again. However, with her last strength, Lucy grabbed the hand that was lying under the rubble and could not understand how this could have happened. She hoped that everything worked out, and soon, due to a strong blow, she lost consciousness. In fact, the girl could not resist, and when she got to the bedroom, through the open door, she saw her master lying under the rubble. Of course, Lucy was very scared. She couldn't stand there, so she quickly ran into the room and went to the hand she saw. She began to quickly clear away the rubble, but thought that he was probably already dead and simply tried to feel his pulse on his hand in order to check that her efforts were not useless. Then, for some reason, other debris began to fall from the ceiling and landed on her head again. Lucy didn't even notice how she lost consciousness because she immediately woke up in her dream. She stood calmly on her feet and noticed that there was not a scratch there and nothing hurt, so she realized that this was a lucid dream. Yes, the girl knew that at that time it was not the time to relax and just sleep. She had to somehow come up with a way to wake up and do at least something in life. The girl was very worried about her master. After that, she began to walk around the mansion, which turned out to be on all sides, and heard some strange sound nearby. She knew that it was the sound of chains. She assumed that perhaps a dog was locked inside a separate building in the mansion, so she decided to go up and check. As soon as Lucy entered, she saw that this sound was coming from the basement. She was certainly very scared to go down there. However, she had to do it. And while she was walking into the unknown, the girl thought about why she felt a strange excitement. It felt as if she was stepping where she should never have gone. She had a very strange feeling. She didn't understand what kind of strange dream it was. It was like this. She really hoped that all this would be a trifle, because after all, she got to the unusual door at the end of the basement from which these sounds were coming. Without thinking twice, the girl opened the door and suddenly saw some fair-haired man who was sitting next to her owner, who was tied up. There were many different jars and flasks in the room that contained personal liquid. This blonde man started to inject something into her owner. He started to smile and said that everything was fine. He should have stayed in the same position. How could this man say that the guy was still in the grip of a nightmare, so he would not be able to understand his words? The man who was lying tied up was breathing heavily. He was clearly uncomfortable with everything that was happening. However, this stranger said that it was very good that he paid that guy so much for the order. Meanwhile, Lucy stood behind the door and listened to all this, trying to behave as quietly as possible so that she would not be noticed. This guy continued to speak. He laughed joyfully and thought about how much the blood cost. Now he could definitely consider himself very rich since he had many test tubes with the blood of its owner. The man continued to laugh loudly and said that no one would dare to ignore him anymore. Now the power was in his hands, and he was very happy about it. Meanwhile, Lucy entered the room. She took a small hammer that was lying on one of the nightstands and quickly approached this stranger and hit him on the head with all her strength. The man, of course, immediately lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Lucy thought that she would condemn anyone who treated children cruelly, even if it was just a dream. The girl did not intend to allow such cases even in her dreams. She immediately ran up to the little boy and did not even suspect that it was her master. She saw the tattoos on his body and asked if everything was okay with him. Then the boy's eyes opened. They were red. His gaze was empty. Lucy thought that he had tattoos not only on his body, but also on his face. He was somewhat similar to her master. As long as the girl knew that it was a dream, she assumed that this boy seemed similar to the master because she had not seen other men recently. Lucy also thought that he would definitely be very angry if he found out that he appeared in such a dream. Meanwhile, the boy looked at the girl in surprise, and as soon as he saw her, he said something. I immediately understood what he was saying and told him to wait. In the meantime, she was going to untie his hands and feet. The boy continued to say something, but Lucy completely ignored his words. Soon she took him and said that they needed to leave. The guy was very surprised. He immediately asked where she was going to take him, but Lucy said that they had to go anywhere, just not to stay there, because it was a terrible place. She decided to get out of the basement first, and only after that did she think about anything. Soon she ran out into the street, and the boy was very uncomfortable about this, since the daylight was incredibly bright for him. Soon his eyes finally adjusted, and he couldn't stop looking around. Everything around him looked simply amazing. This boy looked at the falling leaves and the birds that were sitting on the branch. This fresh air blew on him from all sides, and he felt very pleased. Lucy, meanwhile, happily smiling, ran away with him in her arms and said that they had to leave. She was very happy that she was able to help him, but for some reason, the boy was not so optimistic. He looked back at the basement from which she pulled him out and suddenly became sad. Some time passed since that moment, and Lucy, who was still in a dream, suddenly felt even through it that something was licking her body. The girl could not understand at all what was happening. She felt it, but could not wake up. She also felt very ticklish. She thought that it was very strange that she felt as if something was licking her, because she knew for sure that there were no dogs in the estate of the man for whom she now worked. Then she suddenly remembered the dream she had, and soon finally opened her eyes, and the first thing she looked at was the man who turned out to be her master. He was licking her leg. When the man saw that Lucy had finally woken up, he stopped doing this. The girl pulled her leg out and screamed loudly at the owner, asking what he was even allowing himself to do. But the man told her not to move because he hadn't finished yet. After that, he took her hand and began to lick his finger, which was quite badly injured. Lucy was incredibly shocked. She did not understand what was happening, but she still did not move, and soon she felt how the pain that the girl felt in her finger completely went away. She pulled out her hand and asked the gentleman how he had cured her wounds with a simple lick, since he was not a beast, so she did not understand how this was even possible. But Lucy also said that even animals cannot heal with just a lick. However, when she looked at her perfectly whole hand, she was very surprised. After that, the girl thought that before she fell, she felt debris hit her head. She touched the back of her head and noticed that there was no wound at all, and that place did not hurt at all. Lucy then turned her gaze to her master and immediately realized that he had managed to try there too. This, of course, put her in a very awkward position. However, she decided not to think about it. Soon she suddenly screamed and said that now she understood everything. It was all in his saliva. She was really beaming with happiness and said that the dragon's saliva had such properties that she thought it was incredible and said that he was the most amazing host. The man was a little embarrassed by this. However, looking at the girl, he asked, "Didn't she know about this?" Lucy immediately said that of course she couldn't have heard about this anywhere. The guy, seeing her expression, said that it was incredibly stupid. However, getting up from his seat, he said that it didn't matter at all. The voice suddenly became very stern and the look cold-blooded. He said that he gave her money and told her to leave. For this reason, he did not understand how she ended up there. I immediately realized that she was really guilty because she never left. So the girl understood that it was useless to lie and decided to tell the truth. Lucy lay down at his feet and said that she hid in order to save money and asked his forgiveness for having disobeyed him after all. Her owner, hearing this, was a little surprised. He did not understand why the girl was so obsessed with this money, but Lucy burst into tears and asked him not to beat her or punish her because she didn't climb into bed. So she didn't break the agreement, so she really hoped that he wouldn't kick her out for this. Lucy also said that technically she fell outside the bed and was only holding his hand. The man thought about it and thought that it was really logical and correct. For a while he was silent. However, he soon realized that arguing with her was useless. Therefore, sighing heavily, he asked Lucy how she managed to get into his dream. As soon as the girl heard this information, you were very surprised and asked what he meant. This half-dragon was called Scar. He moved closer to the girl, and looking straight into her eyes asked, did she really know how to use magic, or was she a sorceress, and perhaps even a real magician? Having heard all this, she immediately became indignant and said that it was complete nonsense. Warlocks received power through a contract with demons, and magicians were born with magic. She explained to the man that if she had such abilities, she would definitely not work as a maid. She could easily curse people or earn money in the palace. Hearing this, Scar really thought about it and realized that she was telling the truth. But he also thought that it was very strange that he was able to quickly believe her. Therefore, the man replied that it was all suspicious because he did not understand how she was able to get into his dream since she did not possess any magic. Meanwhile, Lucy looked at his hand and said that before falling, she grabbed his hand and asked if it could be somehow connected. The man, hearing this, was a little surprised. He looked at his palm and thought about her words. Seeing his worried Google look, Lucy immediately explained that she took his hand not because of any dirty thoughts. She just wanted to check whether he was alive or not. However, Scar thought about it for a while and said that now everything was clear to him. There was a curse on him that made him see nightmares. When Lucy touched him and fell asleep, she was able to see the same dream that he did. The girl, having heard about the curse, immediately became worried. She asked if everything was okay with him, and also if he could die because of this curse. Scar explained that an ordinary person would have weakened and died, but for him it was just a small inconvenience. However, the girl still did not understand why everything turned out this way and was really scared. With a heavy sigh, the man explained to her that one greedy man wanted to pacify a disobedient servant and nothing more. Hearing this, Lucy immediately thought about the dream she had when she was unconscious and realized that that child was, in fact, her owner. For a while, Lucy was silent. Then she sat down next to the man and asked if he was really allowed to tell her this, since he had a difficult past, and perhaps this topic was unpleasant for him. But the man explained that it was too late to worry. He remembered that, in his dream, she had burst into the room where he was being bullied and said that she had already seen his case and everything else, so she was obliged to bear responsibility. And so some time passed from that moment, and eventually, Lucy turned out to be a maid who saw every corner of the master's body. She decided to take responsibility and put his new chambers in order in the east wing of the first floor, because the previous ones were destroyed after a huge explosion. One of the colossi was incredibly ashamed that she had given such a deep meaning to his innocent words. In any case, the master's piece was now on the first floor, so she really hoped that the next full moon her room would survive. The gentleman also said that all this happened only because he tried to cast a spell in his sleep and waved his arms. Scar explained that it was like pulling a blanket in a dream, only instead of sleeping, he used magic in reality. Therefore, next month, if the girl is not in the room, then nothing else should happen. He explained that he only had this condition during the full moon, so on other days she was definitely safe. Lucy was surprised as soon as she heard that he only gets like this during the full moon and asked why this happened. Scar explained that he didn't know why. However, it was on this day that his mental strength noticeably weakened. On such days, he couldn't get out of nightmares for a long time. In the end, he had no choice but to just continue sleeping and raging. So when he posted the ad, he specified that no one should be sent on a full moon. And now, Lucy, as soon as you heard about this, you immediately understood why that man from the agency insisted that she not go to the estate on a full moon. Because of this, Lucy became unbearably ashamed of herself because she disobeyed and ultimately caused a lot of trouble, not only to herself, but also to the master. The fact that she ignored the warning of the man from the agency and also demanded that she be hired because she was badly injured. Therefore, Lucy, without realizing it, realized that she had to somehow correct this situation and thereby apologize to the man. So on that day, when the unpleasant incident happened again, the girl stood up and said that Scar had nothing to worry about. She was ready to enter the master's dreams every month and deal with this money-obsessed scoundrel. The girl also said that if the gentleman sees good dreams, then the house will remain safe and sound, and accordingly, everyone inside will be safe. In fact, as soon as Scar heard this, he was very surprised. He also became embarrassed. Lucy had never seen such an expression on his face, and now, when some time had passed since that moment, and the full moon was finally about to arrive, Lucy reminded him of her agreement. The man said that he was in no way prepared to agree to this, and when she heard this, she immediately became outraged and said that she did not need additional payment for this, that she was prepared to voluntarily do something like this. But Scar explained that he simply didn't want anyone else to see him like that, and asked if she would really like it if something like that happened to her. The girl said that it was really unpleasant. However, there was no way out. She promised that as soon as she entered his dream, she was not even going to look at the gentleman. She explained that she could defocus her gaze and sneak up and finish him off with one blow of the hammer. Scar didn't understand why she continued to insist on all this when he had already said that everything was fine and she didn't need to do anything. Lucy continued to talk about what she heard, that it was not only about the house, but also that that day was the most painful of the month. You can't constantly endure torment, because the soul was exhausted from it, and she didn't want that to happen to him. The girl said that if he would continue to experience this horror endlessly, one day he would simply break down, and that would be it. But she definitely didn't want that to happen. That's why she sincerely offered him her help. The man, hearing this, immediately frowned. His hand suddenly began to tremble with anger, and he said in a quiet voice that she should under no circumstances feel sorry for him. But Lucy explained that it wasn't pity, but simple concern that if he continued like this, he might go crazy. The girl thought about what if he had some kind of support for his soul, or a friend, or at least a hobby, so that he could distract himself from all these terrible thoughts and dreams. And then she came up with something. Lucy, with a smile on her face, asked if he by any chance had a lover. She said that if only he weren't angry, he could definitely be incredibly popular, and girls would throw themselves at him in droves. She also asked if by any chance among the maids who came there was one that he might like. She also asked what his tastes were in general. At that moment, Scar finally couldn't take it anymore, and he yelled at the girl and told her to mind her own business. Lucy understood that he was not in a good mood, because the man scolded her and told her to go and work. For this reason, the girl went to do her duties anyway, but at least she was able to find out why that receipt appeared. As expected, it was because of those maids who locked themselves in his bed without asking. Lucy thought about the fact that it was really terrible. She felt sick, even from the thought that a complete stranger could climb into her bed. But as the gentleman said, she completely in vain decided to meddle in her business, and for this reason, she needed to stop already. However, Lucy did not know why the man seemed no longer a stranger to her, and assumed that most likely it was because she saw everything that happened to him in person, and she felt incredibly sorry for him. I really wanted to help him with all my heart, but I didn't know how I could do it, especially considering the fact that he refused her help. Despite the fact that she was only a maid and could do little, Lucy believed that the man she saw in her master's dream should know how to remove this curse. She immediately became interested in whether the gentleman even knew where this man was. Now then, she could take a day off during the full moon and go looking for him. She would really like to meet this person, and if she succeeded, she would use all her charm and ask him to share information that she absolutely needed. However, Lucy thought about the fact that perhaps she would not have been able to seduce him somehow, because she was not that beautiful and had no special talents, and her face was the most ordinary. She believed that for sure, during all this time that there was a curse with the master, he tried everything, but since nothing worked, it meant that he had to simply come to terms with it. Lucy thought that it must have been incredibly difficult for him to endure all this alone. However, suddenly, she felt something strange in her chest. The girl even panicked a little. She immediately thought that she was sick. Lucy didn't know what to do. After all, getting sick in such a place was the same as dying immediately. There was no doctor or even a pharmacy nearby, so she knew that it was very dangerous. And at that moment, Lucy suddenly heard something fall out of the table she was wiping, which immediately interested the girl. She sat down to see what it was and saw a small book. Lucy didn't expect it to fall, and immediately became interested in what genres of books the gentleman usually read, because he certainly had unusual taste. She dusted the book and saw that it was not an ordinary book with stories. It was a dictionary for the general development of the baby. The girl immediately took the book back to the shelf and wondered if the gentleman really had some kind of secret child, and he was trying to teach him. After Lucy looked at the bookshelf and saw all these titles, she was very surprised, and that same evening, when she was helping the gentleman take a bath, she asked if he himself had read all those books in his office. Scar was, of course, very surprised by such a question, and putting on his robe, he asked why she asked, and also said that, of course, it was he who read them. Lucy felt very awkward. However, she said that she was sorry for what she was going to say, but she didn't expect him to read classic novels that ladies usually read. And as soon as the man heard this, he immediately ran up to her and asked if she really said that these were novels. Lucy was amazed. She asked, didn't he really know that absolutely all the books in his office were bestsellers of classical romance? Scar said that this simply couldn't be. After all, he asked to be given books about curses and devils, but the girl, hearing this, said that it was probably just a misunderstanding. The man then shouted loudly and said that he had been told that these books were practically impossible to get anywhere, and that was why they had taken a lot of money from him. But it turned out that this was not true. There were also a lot of them on sale, and they were not at all on the topic that he needed. Lucy then replied that in fact, if he himself had flown those books, they certainly would not have been able to deceive him. And then she asked, was that dictionary really for him, since he couldn't read? Scar got very angry, because he didn't think that she would be able to find out about his secret. He sighed heavily. He said that despite the fact that he learned the language, he reads very slowly. Lucy didn't judge him. On the contrary, she smiled and said that learning a foreign language is really very difficult, and he is a great guy for continuing and not giving up. Then she asked if the owner would like her to teach him to write, and then she could go shopping with him. Now she had fewer places to clean up after the explosions, so she definitely had an hour a day free. Only the guy heard about it, who was very surprised and asked did she really want them to go together. And Lucy said that it was exactly like that, and even though these weren't the books he wanted to buy, they were still very popular, so she thought that they would also be fun and interesting to read together. Hearing this, Scar became very embarrassed for a while. He just stood and looked at her, but after that, he began to leave and told her not to stick her nose into other people's business. As soon as the girl heard this, she was immediately surprised and asked what he meant. The man replied that she understood everything anyway, but he suddenly stopped and said that tomorrow was a free day, so it would be good if you went. He felt very awkward talking about all this. However, he told Lucy that he also didn't want to live with this for long, so he wouldn't be against it. The girl was very happy about this, so the next day, early in the morning, they went to the market together. As soon as Lucy looked around and saw many different counters and buyers, She was surprised and said, smiling happily, that the village was very lively. There were many people around. She also managed to go into a bookstore and bought a book about the nature of dragons. However, she also understood that because this book was sold at the market, it only contained basic knowledge. But Lucy believed that this was not a serious problem for her, and it could be very useful. And for this reason, she did not despair. She turned to Scar and suggested that as soon as they returned home, they should immediately read one book in order to find out what kind of success they could have. The man was very shy. He walked behind her dressed completely in black, and even with a hood. However, he took the book from her and said that he himself would like to carry it. Lucy was surprised and asked why he suddenly took her away, because she was not heavy, but the man said that she could have been stolen, because there were a lot of people on the street, and then their money would have been wasted. The girl did not explain to him that it was unlikely. She only smiled and thought that he was very similar to his younger brother, who could not admit something and therefore pretended that he was very stubborn. So she didn't refuse him and suddenly laughed at the balls. He immediately frowned and asked what was so funny. Continuing to smile, Lucy replied that it was nothing like that. There was just one place she wanted to look into, and she asked if he was against it. The man immediately became wary and asked her what place they were talking about, because he was really interested. Then Lucy went to a tattoo studio and decided to contact a professional to find out if something could be done. The girl pointed to Scar's tattoo and said that she wondered what he thought about her husband, that he had tattoos like these, and that it seemed to her that because of them, he was constantly having nightmares. The girl also said that she would like to somehow bring them together, or perhaps fix it so that this does not happen again. As soon as Scar heard that she called him her husband, he could not hear anything else. He did not understand why she did this and was quite worried about it. However, the tattoo artist replied that he didn't even know what to tell them, since it would definitely not be possible to completely remove them. However, it was possible to add pigment to match the skin color and make them more fashionable. He asked the couple if they were ready to do this. Lucy then immediately turned to Scar, and calling him her dear, asked if he was ready to do this. As soon as she called Scar her dear, he was silent again because he did not understand why she was doing all this, and this made him incredibly uncomfortable. The girl turned to him again, and then the man finally came to his senses. He began to leave the studio and said that he did not want to do this. He did not see the point in adding skin color. Although she eventually apologized to the tattoo artist for making her husband feel embarrassed, she then gave him a small amount for the consultation, which he nevertheless carried out, and again apologized for the inconvenience. The man, seeing that she even gave him money for the consultation, was a little upset. He said that the girl was incredibly kind, and he would not want to let her go like that without doing anything. That's why he asked if it was true that these tattoos were not simple. As soon as he saw them, he immediately understood. After all, they were similar to those used in black magic. Let him hear about black magic and immediately ask if it was the same as a curse. She also asked if he knew anything about it and if he could remove it. The tattoo artist replied that he himself did not know, but he knew someone who could help with this. Meanwhile, Scar, who had run away nearby, heard all this and immediately became interested. Therefore, he decided to return. The tattoo artist, meanwhile, explained how one could get to the herb and medicine shop. He said that if the girl saw a man who was buying a lot of strange herbs there, then this was exactly the same black bookman that she needed for a consultation. He always bought some strange things in large quantities and walked around with bags of coins. The man suggested that perhaps he might know the way, while Lucy had already finished talking and went down to the Scar, which had decided to stay there. Immediately after this, they went in that direction, and the girl approached one of the sellers. She asked him for forgiveness and asked if he could tell them something. The man looked very unfriendly. He turned to the girl and asked what she was looking for. She could tell him, and he would immediately help. Lucy replied that she was not looking for herbs, but for a person, and asked if there was a sorcerer among his clients. The man was of course upset that she didn't come for the goods. However, he said that in fact most of her clients were magicians or sorcerers, and he also began to drive her away, telling her to go her own way if she didn't need anything, because she was only blocking his path. Lucy was surprised that he was so rude to her. She looked at the herbs and asked what it was. If the thing was good, then she was ready to buy it. The seller smiled immediately. He said that this herb is true. If you eat it or inhale the smoke, it will cloud your mind and make you speak only the truth. He also said that if she suspects her husband of cheating, she can try it. He highly recommended this thing to her. It really worked. As soon as Scar heard this, Lucy immediately became wary, laughing nervously. She said that she didn't need it, after which she turned her gaze to the small jars and asked what they were doing. The seller replied that it was a potion that changed souls for a short time. Red and blue were sold in pairs. So he said that some people say that if you put a hair of the person you want to swap bodies with in the red potion, I put my hair in the blue one, and then swap and drink, then the souls will switch places. Lucy immediately realized that this was a very unreliable potion, and for this reason, she definitely would not want to buy it, since she could not have complete confidence. But the seller of the step time said that this potion was created by a famous magician, so it cost about 50 million gold. And Lucy, hearing this, could not contain her surprise. She thought that this really was just another world, and almost went crazy from such prices. Then the girl looked to the side and saw that among the potions there was some kind of clay doll. She immediately asked how much this doll cost and what it could do, because this thing really interested her a lot. But at that moment, some customer ran up to the counter. He pushed Lucy and said that she was in the way, so he told her in a rude voice to immediately move out of his way. The girl almost fell, but fortunately, Scar, who was standing next to her, caught her. He got very angry because he did not understand how one could be so rude. He immediately started yelling at this customer and asked who he was. He suddenly jumped out and pushed his wife, and also asked if he was really tired of living since he did that. However, this man immediately turned to them and chuckled and said that this guy definitely didn't look like he belonged in their circles, so he told them not to interfere with someone else's business and to leave as far and as quickly as possible. He also said that if the guy didn't understand magic, then there was no point in even touching these things. He only delayed everyone around and got in the way. Of course, Scar was very angry. He couldn't believe that he dared to tell the dragon that he didn't understand magic and was already thinking about how to take revenge on him for this. But Lucy noticed his anger. She touched his hand and thereby tried to calm him down. The Scar was distracted and did not understand what to do. But the girl meanwhile calmly asked for forgiveness and said that they were looking for a sorcerer. The man then asked what they needed. Did they really want to make an order? Lucy replied that she would like to talk to him a little, if he wouldn't mind. The man, of course, was not immediately delighted with this. However, looking at Lucy's cleavage, he said that she was a rather pretty lady, and for this reason, calling himself a great sorcerer, he said that he was ready to listen to her. Scar stood behind him in the meantime and was still incredibly unhappy. He didn't like this situation, and he hoped that it would end soon. He thought that this man was definitely not a great sorcerer. Only a pitiful glimmer of magical power emanated from him, so he was simply lying. Scar even thought that his soul had no value. For this reason, the demons did not lend him much strength. And this meant that he was a non-entity not only on the outside, but even in his soul. And besides, he really didn't like the way this man looked at Lucy's body. When it was all over, he would definitely like to hit this man hard. Meanwhile, Lucy explained all the details to this man. She said that the tattoo artist suggested that tattoos could be connected with black magic, so she wanted him to look at this drawing and give his opinion. She also said that if the information turned out to be useful, she was ready to pay him. And if it led to more useful information, she was ready to give an additional amount. Of course, this magician was interested in such money, so he told him to show the tattoo. Meanwhile, he took off his hood and showed the tattoo that was on his face, saying that he didn't think that a man could understand anything at all by looking at it and give any useful advice. However, as soon as he saw this spot, he immediately looked very scared for a while, and after that, he laughed loudly. Through his laughter, he said that this pattern was precisely made by the sorcerer. Each line of the tattoo described in detail how to rob and subjugate. Lucy, hearing this, could barely contain her laughter, because the situation was really very funny. But this wizard said that he, of course, even knows who created it. The world of wizards is so small, therefore everyone had their own habits in drawing patterns. The girl, hearing this, immediately became interested and asked who did it. The man, continuing to laugh, replied that of course he would not tell her this valuable information just like that. Then the girl handed him a bag of money, saying that if it was about them, then she was ready to give them away. But as soon as the man reached for the money, he grabbed Lucy by the hand and said that he didn't need the money at all. The girl was very worried. She didn't understand what he was talking about. However, she felt a strong threat. Smiling again, he said that she should spend the night with him, and then he would tell her everything because women like her are a real rarity, and he would not like to miss his chance. She didn't understand what kind of horrors he was talking about. How could he think that she could spend the whole night with this man, and it didn't even matter to him that she was married and that her husband was standing next to her? Looking at this wizard, she thought that he was real trash, but she didn't know what to do. After all, if she immediately refused, she would lose the valuable trace to cure the scar. The girl sang and didn't answer, when suddenly a man came closer to the guy and said in a rude voice that he should take his hands off him. And after that, without thinking twice, he hit him right in the face. So he grabbed the man by the neck and began to strangle him, and he also asked how he dared to pester someone else's wife. Lucy was very worried. She understood that this would not end well, but she could not do anything about it. Scar, meanwhile, shouted at him and continued to convey his. However, the sorcerer asked if he really did solve everything only with his fists, and he also added that judging by the fact that curses were on him, he himself was not a model of righteousness. The wizard also said that good things should be shared. For this reason, he could have shared the girl, because she was very pretty. The guy couldn't believe that he was saying all this seriously. He continued to strangle him, and thought that this was real trash, and that he probably also deceived other desperate people just to get benefits for himself.